Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Austing. I'm the marketing manager here at Superior Support Resources. Welcome to this morning's TechBytes session, Know Your Enemy, the Best Defense Against Cyber Attackers, right on theme with National Cybersecurity Awareness Month that we'll be championing throughout October. So keep an eye out for additional resources and events throughout the month. Just before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. The first is if you at any point see this screen, just press the play button and you'll get right back into the session, the live session. And then if you are experiencing any technical issues, you can hit the reconnect button. It's a green button on your webinar screen there. And then also, please chat with us throughout the session. We'll be doing a Q&A session at the end. We might pick up a couple questions along the way as we see them. But your way of getting those questions into us is that chat box on your right-hand side. We also have a polling question, which should be up right now near the chat section. So let us know if you've ever experienced a cyber attack. And we'd love to know how many of you have had troubles with that already. That does it for housekeeping. I'm going to hand it off to Sarat, our president and CEO here at SSR. And he's going to go over a little bit about SSR and then some cybersecurity points and introduce our speaker for the day. Sarat?
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. Real quick background, and many of you guys know Superior Support Resources. We're an IT outsourcer that's been around since 1996. There's about 50 of us in Brookfield and another 20 of us in Chennai. And we kind of focus on everything from managed services to implementing platforms. When it comes to security, we've been working on it for about 15 years. We're SOC compliant, which is a type of certification that a lot of people that are publicly traded in financial industries face. We also do software development, a little bit of staffing and virtual CIO. For many of you guys that I noticed in attendees, a number of you guys are clients, so I thank you for your support. And I hope you find today's presentation interesting and insightful as you move forward in this world with a lot of different cyber threats. So the areas I want to kind of talk about, from a security standpoint, is we really have to kind of balance a couple different things. And the way I kind of looked at it, Katie asked me, she's like, how would you describe cybersecurity? And I kind of summarized it in three areas. I think of access, trust, and compliance. So what does access look like? In the last 10 years, we've gone from very centralized systems, centralized procurement to you need data and access to information anywhere and everywhere. If you guys think about it, it's not just, it used to be all about your smartphone, but you're accessing your data in home computers, the concept of bring your own device, you're accessing it in guest computers, you're accessing it at a hotel kiosk. So you really are getting access to your corporate and business data anywhere and everywhere. You're also sharing a lot more data with many other providers. In many cases, if you think about it, we've outsourced different components of services ourselves. I mean, we've gone from using an HR management system to a training system to a number of different online systems that we're sharing a number of data. I think of even as a mid-sized company, we transact more online from a financial standpoint than we ever have before. So we're just using data in more places, kind of across the board. I also look at it and say that the next part would be is the trust side of it. So everything about cybersecurity to me is trust. How do you trust what you're doing, what your procedures and processes are? Unfortunately, I've seen it way too often where we're a group of people that want to be helpful to each other. So we get a phishing attack or an email that says, hey, can you get me a few gift cards, or can you make a change in my bank account for depositing my paycheck? And these two are very real examples that I've seen and experienced with clients in the last 30 days, and people have made those changes only to lose monies from that standpoint. A lot of trust is also on what are the things that you do put in place to try and protect your environment. Number one, I will always tell you is, and I think Perry's going to talk about this, but a majority of your threats are internal to your organization. So what do you do from a training standpoint, from a proactive infrastructure management standpoint, as well as your processes and procedures? Anything from a financial standpoint, it's important that you kind of define it. How do you guys deal with wires and ACHs? How do you set up vendors from that standpoint? I've seen people get emails or letters from an existing vendor that says, hey, this is no longer my account. Please send all of your monies to this account, and accounts payable has made those changes only to be sending monies to the wrong places. So as an organization, how we build trust with systems and platforms becomes really important. One part I find fascinating is, so those of you guys that know me personally, I have two kids that are 17 and 18, and Rena and Raj, it's fascinating. Anything that has a like on it, I think they automatically trust it. So from that standpoint, I just find it fascinating to see how many people look at things online, really don't dig into it to see how your data is going to be used, and they inherently trust it. The last part I'll share with you guys is I think compliance is going to be expanding throughout all of our industries. It used to be the financial industry. Then you guys saw healthcare. For those of you guys that are in manufacturing, it started off with the 800-171. Now we're seeing CMMC. I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see compliance and secure computing being impacted in each and every industry. So I think a lot of those things are going to also drive how we look at security, how we look at trust, how we look at compliance from that standpoint. The last two comments I would make on it is, and this is not a pro or con, but cryptocurrency has really made it an enabler for some of these activities. It's extremely easy for bad actors to do things and get paid in currency that is not traceable. And I know, as a matter of fact, I don't know, Perry, you're going to talk about this, but the U.S. government just released a document that said that they will start penalizing companies that are paying bad actors on cryptocurrencies, depending on where the bad actor and which country that bad actor is coming from. So I think that's an interesting one out there that's happening. And the final thing would be is I see at least one insurance company that's on our webinar today, but cyber liability has become a really active conversation. And a lot of my clients have reached out to me to say, how do I fill this out? Please don't just go through it and write yes to everything. Understand your risk and implement and address your risk before you just fill out the cyber liability documents. With that, I really want to kind of turn it over to our guest speaker, who's Perry. Perry actually comes from a company called KnowBe4. It's one of our vendor partners that we work with, that we use for training, which we believe is one of our biggest threats out there. We'll work with our clients and run custom campaigns to help their employees understand different types of threats that are out there. Perry, if you want to kind of give your brief instead of me reading it, it's always better to hear directly from the presenter.
Sure. And then do you want me to just roll straight into the presentation from them?
Yeah, please. That would be great.
Great. Yeah, so my name is Perry Carpenter. I work for a vendor named KnowBe4, and we focus all around the human side of security because, as you've heard, these people who work for us are a blessing. They help us be really productive and move the business forward. But an untrained end user has a lot of risk associated with it. And it's not just even untrained end users that are doing most of the production. It's the people that are setting up your infrastructure and installing your software and all that. If they don't have the right amount of understanding about the ways that the systems integrate together and fit, and the data can be transformed or misused by another system, well, then you're still due for a bad day. And so finding good trusted partners is a big deal, but also when you have people internally that are configuring those systems or touching those systems in any meaningful way, you need to make sure that they are trained appropriately and know the ramifications of every decision that they are about to make. And so that's what we focus on as a company, is really just enabling the end user community to understand the security risks that are out there. And so for me, what I want to focus on today really is a number of mindsets. And this is primarily going to be focusing on well, I say a number, that number's two, the mindset of the enemy that's out there that is crafting attacks towards organizations, and then the mindset of the recipient of the attack. So the mindset of our end users and us, and why we fall for attacks over and over and over again, and why specifically social engineering attacks are the de facto way that most cyber criminals will try to take advantage of us. So as we get into it, oh, and let me make one more caveat too. You'll see me look over here a lot. That's because my monitor's here and my camera's here. It's not that I'm ignoring you and doing email as I'm talking or something like that. All right, so we're going to really hit on these three topics in the time that we have. Why hackers hack, so the motivation behind cyber attack. We'll talk about the psychological effect of attacks, why we fall for them, and then what we should be looking out for. And this is going to be really good, I think, for you to share some of these things with your employees, but also as we near a tumultuous U.S. election, and as we're dealing with a number of really hot touch points around the world today, from race relations to a pandemic to more and more polarization from people groups around the world, there's a lot of things that are being exploited to make people make very rash decisions, or to twist people's minds in certain ways to make them believe things that may not necessarily be fully grounded in truth. And so we'll be talking about the disinformation and the misinformation problem as well, and how we might be able to help our employees and our families and ourselves weed through the things that are being masqueraded as truth today. So what's the motivation for attackers? I'm going to blow through these pretty quickly because since most of you are in the technology space, you have a general understanding of these, and I don't want to overhammer something that you may already know. But I think it's really important for us to realize that there's a spectrum of motivations that are out there. It's not just all one thing, this panacea of here's why cyber attackers do this. There's a big range of reasons why cyber attackers may do something, and their motivation can affect the vector that they take in order to launch an attack, or it may affect when they believe they've accomplished their goal and how much is enough. And so as we get into it, when you think about attackers, there's really kind of a physical parallel to this. If you've ever, and in my neighborhood, we have this now where just about everybody has cameras outside their house. And on our neighborhood Facebook page, people will post pictures that and videos of things that have concerned them from the night before, and every now and then you'll see like a two people walking down the street just randomly trying car doors or house doors, and what they're looking for is something that's already open, something that doesn't take much effort to get into. So if something's locked, they'll just move on to the next one, and they're going to move on until they find a soft target or an already open target. Or something that looks appealing enough because they can look through the window and they can see that there's something maybe worth taking a bigger risk. And so that's what we're getting towards with targets of opportunity. Target of opportunity would be the equivalent of somebody just kind of jiggling the door and saying, oh, it's open. I guess I'll go through that now and see what I can find inside. A targeted attack would be, oh, I know that the mayor of this city lives on this street and at this house, and I have an axe to grind against the mayor, or I know that he or she has this certain possession in their house that I want, and so I'm going to target them. Organizations are the same. When a cyber attacker launches an attack, they can kind of spray, using a number of tools, they can kind of spray across the internet and just basically look for unlocked doors. And where they find those softer targets, they'll then start to push inside and see how far they can get. And then, of course, the targeted attack is, oh, I want to attack Walmart, or I want to attack Walgreens or Taco Bell, or somebody, or a financial institution like Bank of America, because of reason X, whatever that is. And so anytime I'm doing this more spray attack, ultimately I don't care where I land. I'm just looking for those soft targets, and then I'm going to push in and see what I can take advantage of. If I'm going to target something like Bank of America, well, then that means that I have to do a lot more reconnaissance and a lot more prep work on the front end so that I can understand enough about that organization and their infrastructure in order to find an exploit and a vector that's going to work for that. So it's really hard to stop targeted attacks, right? Because that person is motivated against the target, and they're doing research against the target, and they're building up capabilities against the target. Much more easy to stop these spray attacks where they're looking just for opportunity, because in the case of, like, the neighborhood physical example, all you have to do is lock the door. So if you're doing some basic security procedures, you have your firewall settings right, you've got a good secure email gateway, you've got things like application whitelisting, you've done some basic phishing training, social engineering training, and so on. You get all your basic security layers in okay shape, well, then you're going to do a decent job fending off these very casual attacks. When you get to targeted attacks, it takes a lot more vigorous work in order to fend those off. And then, so we start to get into some of these other motivations. So financially motivated, if they're out for money, then of course that's going to shape the way that they start to do things. So it's going to be things like identity theft or account takeover becomes big because they can directly move money around. They may phish an organization saying, oh, hey, send the W-2s or the tax information over to this so that somebody can take advantage and then maybe file taxes on behalf of somebody else. You'll hear things about house title switching and so on that happens. You'll also see things like phishing where somebody's asking a person within the organization to wire money to a certain account. So those are all examples of financial crimes, as are things like ransomware and so on. This DDoS, if you are familiar with that, that's a denial of service attack, where what the attacker typically does is they push so much web traffic at a part of a corporate network, usually the externally facing website, as to take that down. And so what happens is they'll push all that traffic to an externally facing website. They take that down. The customers can no longer access their accounts, but that's just the front end. On the back end, the attacker has gotten through enough system defenses that they've started moving money out, transferring money. Now, the thing is that the people that are trying to access their account validly from the front end aren't able to know that their account's been compromised because they can't see it. That's been DOS, the website's been taken down. And the account reps in the organization is less aware of it because they're only getting calls saying, hey, your website's down. Your website's down. Can you go fix that? And so what they're doing is a very classic distraction technique. And they're putting all the focus on the website, and they're taking focus away from where the crime is actually much more seriously happening, which is in the back end systems and that money being moved out. And so sometimes it can be hours, if not more than hours, before it's discovered the real extent of the attack, because they've done such a successful job just creating noise over here. And then, of course, carding attacks that you hear about. So nation states, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into disinformation, but there's a lot of nation state activity going on right now, especially as we creep up towards the election. So the main culprits in this, of course, are far and wide, but it's usually a government that is targeting another government or the citizenry of that government, and then even sometimes their own citizens, in order to further a narrative. And that narrative is usually to sow doubt about the other government, or to make their own government look bigger and more prestigious and more successful. And so we do see a lot of that around election time. And it becomes a serious problem, because election time doesn't just come and go in the US. There's elections around the world all of the time, and so different governments are constantly launching little attacks in order to gain the upper hand from a messaging standpoint or from a capability standpoint against other governments. Now, the other thing to realize in that is that there's also collateral damage that happens. It's not usually just another government that's targeted. It's the organizations, the companies within that country that are targeted as well, because, well, I already mentioned Bank of America. Bank of America is a symbol within the US of some of the financial infrastructure. It's a very well-known brand, as is a brand like Walmart or so on. And I'm not meaning to pick on these companies or prop them up and say that they're great companies or anything else. They're just well-known brands. So those are the ones I'm talking about. If we were to go over into another country, I would call out different brands. And so that's what's going on when it comes to nation state attacks. Now, the thing with nation state attacks is that you're talking about near unlimited capability. Lots of money that can be put behind that, lots of contractor hackers that can be hired, and then plausible deniability is usually part of that as well, because they can hire those third parties and have a few levels of removal. Corporate espionage, I think you already get this. So it's one company trying to launch attacks or gain competitive advantage or get the secrets of another company. And then gamers. I mean, you may not even think about this when it comes to cyber attack, but there's a trend of gamers trying to exploit systems or trying to exploit companies or trying to exploit each other in order to gain credibility or status or to move further in a game. Things like stealing credits, stealing levels and possessions within games for these games to have these massive world building capabilities and so on. And then there's also things like swatting attacks, which is really, really devious. This has happened a few times where people are online, they get one, and they're, it's online chat and everything else as well. So there's smack talk and everything that goes along with that. And so one person will get mad at another person, or one person will want a competitive advantage over another person because that other person's doing better in the game. And so what they do is they'll do a 911 call. And once they know, the person's address that they don't like and are mad at, they'll basically say, hey, there's a domestic disturbance at this house. I've heard shouting. I've heard that the person has a gun. And so, come prepared to deal with that. And then, of course, what happens is a SWAT team arrives at that house and tragedy ensues, because that's a real serious thing. And so we've seen that several times as well. And it's again, just because of a game. But what's happening with gaming right now is that gaming and finance are starting to intermix as we get these big world building games where you can invest in the world in different ways. And you're not just investing time, but there's a lot of financial interest that can be invested in several games right now. Computer resource theft, you've probably heard of Bitcoin mining and things like that. So this is all around being able to leverage other people's computers in order to accomplish some of your computing goals. And so you've seen that. So SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, did a crowdsourcing effort, years and years ago, where they basically said, hey, install this little client on your machine and you'll be able to help fuel our search. You'll be able to add more computing power to our search. Well, Bitcoin kind of does the same thing, where if you have if you can have a little piece of code installed on your machine, whether you know it or not, that is out there trying to mine for Bitcoin for your own benefit or somebody else's. Now, the malicious piece of this comes when somebody tricks you into clicking on an ad or downloading some software, and that piece of code ends up on your machine without your consent, and it's out there eating up all your resources trying to mine for Bitcoin. Or sometimes people will take your computer in order to store movies or music illegally, or pornography. And so you've become now part of a distributed network of hard drives that can be accessed when somebody needs to pull down one of those resources. Hacktivists. This is people who have kind of a political or social motive to do what they're doing. And they're just really wanting to make a statement for a cause or against another cause. And so you'll see things like website defacement, denial of service attacks, and so on. And it's all around either propping up their agenda or tearing down the agenda that they don't like. And so they'll do things where you see doxing, that's finding out embarrassing information about an organization and then making that public, or about the people behind that organization and making that public. So kind of spreading that, and just looking for some of these terms that we may not have gone over yet. Yeah, I think you get it. So we saw this several years ago with a lot of religious groups, particularly Middle Eastern religious groups at the time, that would take down websites within America. A lot of those were financial institutions, and would put up a defacement, basically saying, talking about the evils of the West, and so on. But there's a lot of other organizations that do that as well. You'll see Anonymous, the hacking group, which is really just a collective of people that have decided to call themselves anonymous, but they'll sometimes centralize around an idea, and they'll say, hey, we don't like company or person type X. And a number of people will then try to hack that person or embarrass that person. And sometimes there's a website defacement where they will just replace the homepage of that website with a political or social statement, or a grandstanding statement. It says, this site has been taken down by Anonymous, and then or whatever the hacking group is, and then put some of their manifesto on the page, or the reasons why they don't like the company that they took down. And then adware. So this is something you don't necessarily think about as hacking, but it steals a lot of computer resources, and it can be used to launch some fairly insidious attacks. I mean, you get the right kind of adware on your attack, you can get keyloggers, which are stealing your keystrokes, that can take passwords and so on. You can get really basically the basis for things like Bitcoin mining and other mining. You can get website click hijacking and so on. And it's usually just there in order for somebody to gain financial compensation for redirecting you to ads or popping up ads that you don't want to see. But it can become a launchpad for many more insidious things. And then hobbyists, people just trying stuff out. And I think a lot of people are guilty of this when they first start to learn computer security and they download their first little tool set. They want to scan a network and they want to know where vulnerabilities are and they want to try to touch those vulnerabilities and see what's possible. They try to scan their neighborhood's Wi-Fi and see what they can do, what they can attach to, or if they can redirect connections from a legitimate Wi-Fi to a cloned Wi-Fi, and so on. Because otherwise, in their mind, how are they going to learn? They don't know of the safe places, or for some reason, the safe places don't give them the intellectual high of trying to do it for real, and they don't have malicious purposes. It's curiosity more than anything else, but it is dangerous. Because sometimes people know just enough to be dangerous and they can go in thinking that they're not going to cause harm and they can cause immense real or financial harm. And then corporate gangs. So this is basically cyber crime gangs, or what you might even think about as like organized crime and the mafia, but done by organizations that are essentially just groups of hackers, and they work days. They take off on holidays. They have things like bonus programs and incentive programs and benefits and support centers and everything else. So they work just the way that you and I work, but their business is cybercrime. And that, I think, is one of the most interesting and scary developments that's out there, is that when you think about it, well, before COVID, you and I would go to an office every day, and we would sit in a cubicle or an office and we would pound out our day. Well, there are groups of cyber criminals that go to an office every day and they sit in a cubicle or an office and they pound out their day. It's just that their day is attacking your day. And that's a very different type of scenario. And it means that there are teams of people that are doing it by rote in a lot of ways, using the tools that have been given to them, and they're emotionally detached from it. You're just an object or an agenda to them or a goal to them. And frankly, their incentive is that they want to please their boss, not necessarily that they want to take you down because they believe in the cause. Now, the danger comes when it's both, right? They want to take you down because they believe in the cause and they're motivated to do the right thing for their organization. All right, let's skip forward a little bit so that we can cover a couple other things. Pen testers, these are people that work in your organization or that you hire in order to hack your organization or a customer organization legitimately to see what the effects of that are, so that you can tighten things up. And then, yeah, we talked about that as we were going through. And then just a couple categories to set. So white hat hackers are 100% ethical hackers. They just want to understand the security implications of what's going on with the altruistic goal of fixing things. And so they don't tread into these gray areas. They don't do anything bad. They are just, good people trying to make an honest living by helping people find and patch their security vulnerabilities. Black hat hackers are illegal, unethical hackers. They are the criminals, the way that we think about criminals. And then gray hat hackers are people that typically have decent motives most of the time, but they dip their toes into black hat territory. They're very willing to bend the rules, very willing to have a moral flexibility lots of times. But overall, I'd say 70% of the time, their motivations, they believe at least, are pure, but they have still a little bit of that rogue mindset about the way that they do things. All right, so let's talk about now our vulnerability and our end users' vulnerability, because this is all of us now. I like to really frame this around the fact that we are all human, and from the beginning of time, what we've realized is that to be human is to deceive others and to deal with the fact that we ourselves are very vulnerable to deception. And that's where things like social engineering come in. But if you flash back to your earliest childhood, or if you're a parent and you have kids, you know this to be true, that deception is in our nature. It is just, it's part of the human experience. You can probably remember, maybe as you were a kid and your parents were trying to teach you something new that you didn't like to do, maybe like brushing your teeth or something, and it felt awkward and it took up time that you would rather be playing. And you would come out of the bathroom and say, yeah, I brushed my teeth. And your parents would not necessarily believe you, but they'd just go back and check. And they'd go, I can tell you didn't brush your teeth because your toothbrush is still dry. And so now you've done two things. You lied because the thing that they wanted you to do was inconvenient. And you also learned. You learned that in order to successfully lie, you also have to not just say the line of I brushed my teeth, but your toothbrush needs to be wet. And so then you evolve the lie. Next time you wet your toothbrush and you come out and you say that you brushed your teeth, and so on. So that becomes kind of the early version. The kind of slightly later version is when your parents are teaching you to put on a mask in certain social situations. Maybe you've been brought to a family reunion and you didn't want to go to that because you don't like crazy Uncle Bob. He freaks you out and maybe he smells bad or something. And your parents go, well, I don't care if you don't like crazy Uncle Bob. Yeah, you're going to go to the reunion. You're going to go up to him. You're going to smile and you're going to shake his hand and say, I'm really glad to see you. And so we learned to put the mask on. We learned that there are social situations where deception is the expectation, because there are situations where if we say the truth, it will not be accepted as something that is said or done in polite society. And so we learned that deception is a social lubricant. It is something that is injected in order to make our days go well, and in order to make some people feel good within situations, to feel more comfortable in situations. And then we evolve that up till later in life to where our significant other comes out and says, do these pants make my butt look fat? And they're of course, there's a truthful answer in that situation. That truthful answer may not be the answer that the person wants to hear, but there's an answer that you say, and the answer that you say can sometimes be a deception, right? And so we go forward in life deceiving. And then the other thing that's really, really disturbing is that as humans, we like to think that we're good at detecting deception, but the science says we're really, really not. Usually it's coin toss accuracy at best on whether we're accurate in detecting deception. So I'm going to try just a quick experiment with us to kind of give us an idea of how some of this works. And you may have seen this before, but if you have, kind of flash back to the first time in your mind that you saw this and remember what that felt like. If you haven't, let's go through this and see how it works within your mind. So what I want you to do right now is pick one of these cards. Just focus on a card in your mind, lock on it now, and don't forget it, because every card trick sucks if you forget your card. So lock on one card within your mind because they are going away. So now what I want you to do is look at these cards, and if I were in a large room, I'd have everybody at this point raise their hand if their card is gone. Or I'd start with everybody standing up, and if their card was gone, I'd have them sit down at this point. And of course, what happens across the room is that, yes, there's that indication. Everybody raises their hand and says that card is gone. So then the question becomes, how is that possible? And here's what happens in that. We started with this set of cards up here at the top. You can see all those, and then we ended with the second line of cards. And yeah, if you look really closely at that, what you can see is that those are two completely different sets of cards. But you may not have even noticed, because I applied psychological pressure, or I bullied you a little bit at the very beginning of that process, saying, lock your mind on one card, don't forget it. You know, every card trick sucks if you forget your card. So I forced you into a condition that's called change blindness, where you focus on one thing to the exclusion of really understanding, comprehending, or letting sink in everything else that's around that. And many of us are guilty of change blindness every single day. And the reason that that's true is because our brain's job really is to filter and present this thing that we call reality. And the truth of the matter is that reality is different for every single one of us, because we all perceive differently and we all have a different context of understanding. And so what we consider reality is our interpretation of this stimulus that's around us. And if you've ever read an email and come to one conclusion, and then started to do something based on that conclusion, and then you reread it and another word hits you different, or you had some other different piece of context that was given to you in the meantime, and now you interpret that completely differently, you know that this is true. Your brain filtered and created a reality based on all the context, all the basis and understanding that you could muster at the time that you first read the email. And then you got a little bit more context or more understanding, or something else fell into place, you read it again, and you came to a completely different conclusion. Your reality shifted because of a contextual placement. You oriented around the information differently, and it changed your understanding of reality. And so that's what's happening a lot. And that's what cyber attackers and physical attackers and everybody else, social engineers, are taking advantage of all the time. And it really comes down to these two systems of thinking that we all have. This comes from the work of Daniel Kahneman, who is the father of behavioral economics. And what he says is that there are two systems of thinking. There's a system one thinking and a system two. And system one is very fast, it's emotion driven, and it takes shortcuts. Now, that serves us well a lot of times because we don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. But the problem is, like the example of misinterpreting that email, is it's fast, but it's error prone, because you are taking shortcuts all the time. You're not stopping to get all the relevant facts and context and so on. And so you're making all those decisions and you're moving forward, and you're not getting stuck in analysis paralysis. But some of those actions that you take based on the way that you've analyzed the situation are just wrong. And I think all of us have dealt with the effects of that. We don't need to be persuaded that that's the fact. But here's the crux of this. System one governs about 95% of the types of thoughts and behaviors that we do on a day-to-day basis. That starts to get scary, because that means that, you know, over 9 times out of 10, the decisions that we make are governed by system one, and system one can be hacked and hijacked by somebody that is trying to figure out how to take advantage of a human. System two, on the contrary, is much more slow. It's more reliable, and it's more thoughtful. It's based on logic, and it generally leads us to better results, but it's effort driven. It's hard. We don't like it, and it only accounts for 5%. And there's a good reason for that, because if we did spend all of our time in system two, we would be exhausted and we would never get anything done. We would only get a couple things done every day, and we would not be effective. And so System 1 exists for effectiveness and efficiency. System 2 is effectiveness, the majority of the time, but it's much slower. Now, the other thing to realize is that all of us, as I talked about the fact that our realities are based on the way that we perceive things and the way that we orient around information, all of our realities are shaped by cognitive bias. And if you're on Facebook around election time or around any time of political event or social unrest, you'll see that this is true. None of us can be convinced of anything. We believe what we want to believe. We hear what we want to hear. We interpret the facts that we want to interpret, and we get the reality that we expect. It's very, very difficult to shift somebody's narrative of reality once they've locked into that because of all of these cognitive biases. The only way to do it is to not attack their bias, but to build up a new framework of understanding or belief, and start to, in a way that doesn't attack one bias, build up the other one, and let them start to build new understandings and new biases that live in this new frame. And then ultimately they can start to figure out how to dismantle that other one, or they'll learn how to live with the cognitive dissonance, which is what a lot of people do as well. Now, here's why your Thanksgiving table or your holiday table with your relatives is so difficult to sit at when you're having these conversations and you're disagreeing and you're arguing and you're both throwing out facts and situations and you're both going, yeah, that is a fact. I can look that up. I can find that, but I just don't agree with it. And at the end of the day, you walk away and nobody has come to any change of opinion in anything. You're both just more locked into your opinion set. It's because all of these cognitive biases spread across the way that we remember things, the way that we think about social situations and interact with social groups, the ways that we learn and categorize information, the belief sets that we have, and the things that we will choose to believe or not to believe, or to demonize or to idolize, the way that we organize around money, and of course our political systems that we adhere to. So what should we watch out for? I talked a lot about kind of this move towards thinking about the social implications of where we are. So I want to spend just a couple minutes thinking through that. So as we think about this, I give you the same choice, other than the fact that I'm going to make it for you, is that Neo had in the Matrix, where you can either just decide to walk away now, or you can kind of see how far down things go and why we need to pay attention to it. And I will make that decision for you, because I think that what we need is people that are socially grounded and intellectually grounded, understanding why we have the division that we have, and why we fall for the things that we fall for. I'm not championing any side or any part of a spectrum here, politically or ideologically or religiously or anything else. I just want us to realize the fact that all of our opinions and the reasons that we argue with each other are grounded in these other things, and the reasons that we fall for disinformation and misinformation and fake news and social engineering attacks and phishing and all of that are grounded in those same things as well. It's the same thing coming over and over and over again to haunt us. And so the only way to start to disengage from that is to realize that as humans, we have that inherent strength of System 1, but that strength is also an inherent weakness. And we need to figure out how to slow down and interrogate our own learning and our own understanding so that we can start to move forward. So here's what social engineering looks like. Every quarter we start to look at all the different in the wild attacks and the different simulations that we've done that have been very effective. And what we've seen over and over and over again is that anything that heightens emotion, or anything that looks to feed a hunger or a curiosity, is going to be the thing that people fall for. And so you always want to look at things like greed or urgency or curiosity or fear, or things that enrage you, or give self-interest, or are aiming to help somebody, because all of these are basic human emotions and drives that we have. And anytime that that becomes inflamed or agitated, or can get taken advantage of by a social media feed, or by a phishing attack, or by somebody on the phone with you, the more we start to get naturally pushed into system one, and the more all those cognitive biases and the way that we might read information potentially incorrectly come into play. We also see this taken advantage of in even the way that things get designed on the systems that we use. Specifically, mobile devices are a big culprit for this, where somebody will create an ad and they'll take advantage of system one thinking by, within the graphic, embedding something that looks like a hair or a speck of dust. And so ultimately their goal is to get you to click on the ad so they get ad revenue, or they can download malware to your device. And what they do is they'll put this little thing on the ad that looks like something that can be wiped off the screen. And so you're a little bit annoyed by that, and you look at it and you may try to blow it off, or you may try to wipe it on your pants, and then ultimately you get frustrated and you take your finger and you swipe it off, or try to move it that way. And at that point, you've done a capacitive touch on the screen, you've engaged the ad, and you've either given that person some money through ad revenue, or you've compromised your device. And so we always want to be thinking about where our attention is being focused, because like with that card trick, where our attention is, anytime we're giving most of our attention to one area, we're neglecting these other areas, and we don't know what's going on out there, and we're not comprehending it. We're not taking in all of that context. And so as we start to think about things like the disinformation problem that we have, I think it's really important to separate terms. We have two things going on here now when we think about the idea of fake news. Is we have disinformation, which is an intentional spread of false information. So this usually comes from a nation state or a political group that's wanting to spread a false narrative. And then we have misinformation, which is when you or I or a family member sees that story, believes it because our cognitive bias kicks in, and then we share it. We believe that it's real. So we're not creating disinformation. We're spreading misinformation because it fits our social narrative, and we share it because it props up our own belief. Let me move forward through a couple of these because I know we are running out of time. But a few other terms real quick, and I think this is really important to think about when it comes to election time. The idea of astroturfing. So astroturfing, as you can see here illustrated, that I tried to do a really crude illustration, but this is where you have one person basically masquerading as a grassroots society. So it is one person or a political group, a well-funded political group, that has created a fake account that looks like a grassroots campaign within a certain state or city, and then ultimately other people then sign up to be part of that grassroots campaign, and it then propagates from there. But the ultimate start of that was never grassroots. It was intentionally created and funded by somebody with with whatever agenda may have existed over there. Which gets into this idea of a sock puppet account. Sock puppet account is just the hacker term for any fake account that I or somebody else will create to masquerade my identity. So if I create an account under the name Elon Musk and put it on a system, that is my sock puppet, and I'm pretending to be Elon Musk. Now, normally, I wouldn't pick a high-profile name, right? I would pick a name like, well, I'll just say John Doe because that can be anybody. I'll pick a John Doe account, and then I will start to build up a following around that so that I can spread my fake news or launch social engineering attacks or so on, and it doesn't get traced back to me, Perry Carpenter. And then there's lots of different types of fakes that are coming out, deep fakes and cheap fakes and fake photos and so on. Now, the thing to realize with this is that the AI capability is advancing the capability of doing full motion video, fake videos of political figures or stars or anybody else. But the reality is that you and I can do a pretty decent job of that, because we've seen with a few videos that have been launched by political I want to say campaigns, but I don't want to go that far. People with political motives recently, featuring prominent political figures, where it's been an actual video, but it's been slowed down, or frames have been taken out, or the sound has been edited, and so on. That's where we get into this idea of cheap fakes, and anybody can do that with pre-installed software that comes on any PC or Mac. And so that's what we're seeing most of, and that stuff goes viral fast and people believe it. So you don't even need a great AI. You just need a middle schooler's understanding of video editing software or photo editing software, and you can create a political or social movement. And ultimately it's around this 4D strategy: dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. This comes straight out of Russia's playbook with their disinformatia campaigns. And so the state of news is that, or state of play is that fake news is politicized. We are living in a weaponized information situation. Media is all about attention and so on. So I'm going to go through what I did here in the deck, and we'll make sure you get all these, is give some really good examples of times where we've seen that recently. This goes across the political spectrum, both in the U.S. and around the world. So I'm not trying to hone in on just one political or social group. It's going on with all of these. I do think it's really interesting here. This was the Parkland. One of the people left over from the Parkland shooting became a very strong anti-gun advocate, and for a Teen Vogue shoot, tore up a target, like you'd use at a shooting range. Somebody with a political agenda got on Photoshop or the equivalent thereof with film editing software and replaced the target with the Constitution of the United States and caused a big political stir. Of course, poking the gun rights to people that are thinking about trying to remove guns from the situation within the U.S. or control, so gun rights versus gun control context. So again, hot button issues become the thing that will polarize people and will become the thing that makes people click on ads or click on fish or click on anything else or share fake information. Here's some more examples of that for you to have a look at later. And then kind of lastly, education, preparation, and healthy security habits are really the only defense. So this is educating ourselves, our organizations, our families, and so on. So if you're having that holiday conversation, maybe sometimes rather than digging into the issues, maybe we talk about why we have a tendency to dig into the issues. What is it? And maybe we approach these concepts with an intellectual understanding of why we root into certain issues, what our biases are. And then maybe we approach the other person with empathy to say, hey, what helps you get to that understanding? I'd like to understand the way that you built your frame for that, and actually mean it. I think that would get us a lot farther. And with that, I am done. It is 1 minute before the hour.
Good timing. Thank you, Perry. I am just kind of cruising through those questions in the chat box. I think one that comes to my mind is, you talk about the left and right side of the brain and the quick response versus the slow response. Is there any tip or trick you have to shifting your brain into the slow response just to take that gut check on the communications you're interpreting every day?
I mean, for me, I try to have a standard rule of anytime I feel a strong emotion well up in response to reading an email, reading an article, or anything else, just to take a deep breath and read it again, or step away from it and come back, and try to think about what was that email trying to do. Was there a potential hidden agenda by the sender? And once you disengage from the emotion of the communication a little bit, you're less likely to fall for that social engineering attack by clicking on the link, or sending account information or something else. And you're also more likely to, if it's something like a disinformation campaign, you're much more likely to say, hey, before I share this, let me go through a couple fact checkers that I trust and see if that actually makes sense, so I don't accidentally propagate some misunderstanding.
That makes a ton of sense. I want to be respectful of time and just kind of wrap up here. I really appreciate all the time you spent with us today, Perry. Great information, scary, but really good insights you shared with us today. I know we'll all be more aware of analyzing our communications for sure. Also, thank you for all of you joining us today and participating. If you didn't see it pop up, there was an in the offers tab, there's just a quick feedback survey. If you wouldn't mind taking that and telling us how you enjoyed the webinar today, we'll use that for planning future webinars. And speaking of future webinars, we have another webinar coming up on October 22nd that will talk about how to reduce your phishing exposure by 85%. It's part of our National Cybersecurity Awareness Month championing. I know KnowBe4 up on the screen has a number of resources and events this month as well, and it's part of a national campaign. So we hope you join us in being cyber smart. If you haven't already, follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any resources, newsletters, any future Tech Bytes. And thank you again for your time today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.